Hi, in our last video, we talked about what is the basic structure of a game and how to construct a payoff matrix for a two-player game and a simultaneous move game. So today we'll be discussing about Nash Equilibrium and Prisoner's Dilemma. So our three main objectives will be, first of all, see what is Nash Equilibrium. Secondly, see the situation that what is Prisoner's Dilemma. And thirdly, that how to basically find Nash Equilibrium for Prisoner's Dilemma. So before starting with the video, if you haven't subscribed this channel yet, do subscribe this for more videos on games and games theory and statistics. So first of all, let's start with what is Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium, a pair of strategies S hat A, S hat E is a Nash equilibrium for two-player game if no player can improve his payoff by deviating from his equilibrium strategy to another strategy, provided his opponent keeps his equilibrium strategy. So we are simply saying that, okay, for two-player game, let's suppose two players are A and E. So for that two-player game, a strategy is Nash equilibrium if and only if no player has any incentive to deviate from that strategy, provided the other player sticks to its Nash equilibrium strategy. So we are simply saying that let's suppose S hat A and S hat E be the equilibrium strategies. So in this case, if one player is choosing, let's suppose if A is choosing S hat A, then E will not have any incentive to deviate from S hat E. That is, player E will either get the same payoff by deviating or changing its strategy from S hat E, or its payoff will reduce. It can be either situation. But payoff will never increase by deviating. So any player will not have any incentive to deviate from the equilibrium strategy. Let's understand it in a more clear way using an example. Let's suppose there are two players A and B. There are two strategies available, X and Z. These are the two strategies. And we are saying out of this, the pair of strategies of Z is the equilibrium strategy. So this is the situation where both players are choosing the strategy of Z, right? So in this case, we are saying if A chooses the strategy of Z, then and E chooses the strategy of X, E is deviating from its strategy. So in that case, the payoff for E will be less than the payoff that E will get if it chooses the strategy ZZ. So the payoff, or you can write a utility from this for player E, will always be less than the equilibrium strategy payoff. So similarly, if player E is choosing, let's suppose Z, then player A will never have any incentive to choose X. It might choose X, but that is, it will get the same payoff from Z as well as X, right? So basically, we're simply saying it will never have any incentive or a better payoff from deviating from its equilibrium strategy, provided the other player has already chosen its equilibrium strategy, right? So this is the situation of Nash equilibrium. In terms of payoff, if we want to see this, we can simply say it like this, that let's suppose the equilibrium strategies are S hat A and S hat E. Over here, we are representing this A as the payoff of A. So this is simply representing that payoff of A from SA and S hat E. That is, player E is sticking to its Nash equilibrium strategy, but A has chosen any random strategy. This can be a Nash equilibrium strategy or it can be any random strategy. This payoff will always be less than equal to the payoff for A when both of them stick to their Nash equilibrium strategy. So we're simply saying that this payoff can be equal also, but this payoff will never be greater than the equilibrium payoff, right? So we are simply saying that if E chooses its Nash equilibrium strategy, then A will automatically choose its Nash equilibrium strategy or will not have any incentive to deviate from that strategy, right? There's a possibility that any other alternate strategy will be providing him the same payoff. That is possible. But this payoff, this relation can never be this. This can never be this, right? So you're simply saying similarly for player E, it's a Nash equilibrium strategy is S hat A and S hat E. If player E, with the payoff of player E when A is choosing S hat A and E is choosing any random strategy at SE, the payoff will be always less than equal to the payoff of E if both of them stick to their Nash equilibrium strategy. So we are simply saying that none of the player will have any incentive or benefit or a higher payoff from deviating from its Nash equilibrium strategy, provided the other player sticks to its Nash equilibrium strategy. If both the player deviates, then that player can have, but that is not the part of Nash equilibrium strategy. Nash equilibrium strategy simply states about one player deviating and one player sticking to its equilibrium strategy, right? So this is what exactly Nash equilibrium strategy is. Now, let's discuss an example. This is a situation of prisoner's dilemma. So what is the situation? A prosecutor seeks to arrest two bank robbers. He lacks proofs of their involvement in the crime but has managed to have them arrested for a minor fraud charge. He offers to each of them the following choices. If one suspect confesses but the other does not, then one who confessed will go free and the other suspect will be punished for 6 years in jail. Obviously, so it's all, if one suspect confesses and the other does not, the one who confessed will be free and the one who does not will get 6 years of jail. If they both confess, then finally they'll get 2 years in jail, and if none confess, then they both will be convicted for a minor fraud, say for 1 year imprisonment. Right? So this is the situation. Now, from this, if you want to form the strategic game in a proper form, we can say that what are the number of players? 2. And what are those 2 players? Those are the 2 suspects, because they need to take some decisions. Then what all are the actions for those suspects? Those suspects have either of the, will have to choose either of the 2 options, either to confess or not confess. So it has a player set of action is confess, not confess. Now, preferences. Suspects 1 ordering of the action profile from best to worst. So this is, let's suppose I am one of the suspect. Now, what will be the best preference for me? Any day we know for any game theory, it's important that first of all there are 2 assumptions. Assumption of rationality and maximization. That will, I will try to maximize my utility, and whatever I'm doing, there's a reason behind it. So I'm simply saying to maximize my utility, what I would like to have minimum years of jail. So that is, for me, the best situation will be where I have minimum jail or no jail. So in that case, what is that case will be? That will be the case when I confess but the other player does not confess. Because we can see over here, one confess but the other does not confess. One who confess will go free. And in all other situations, I'll have some years of jail. So in this case, for me, it will be confess and not confess. So this confess is for player 1. And this not confess is obviously for player 2, because this is how we represent the strategies. So in that case, I am set free. Then next I'll try to hit, okay, if I'm not getting free, then let's try for 1 year imprisonment. So that will be the case where over here, if none confess, then they both will be convicted for minor fraud, say 1 year in jail. So in that case, both suspect does not confess and each will get 1 year of jail if both players chooses to not confess. Then my choice will be, okay, if this is also not possible, then let's both of us confess. If both of us will confess, then I'll get 2 years in jail. But for me, the last choice will be the situation where the other player confesses but I don't confess. Because when I don't confess and the other player confesses, then I'll get 6 years imprisonment. As we can see here, if one suspect confesses but the other does not, then the one who does not confess will be punished for 6 years in jail. Right? So this is the basic preferences for the prisoner's dilemma strategy game. So now here I've simply copied down this format. I've simply copied down this entire over here. So from this I can see for any player, for player 1, let's suppose. So this utility 1 is simply representing utility for player 1 or payoff for player 1. player 1, or you can also say suspect 1. So now obviously utility will be highest when I confess but the other player does not confess, which is strictly greater, because we can see same years of imprisonment is not the scenario over here. So it's obviously that it will be strictly greater than the situation where both of us do not confess, and then will be the situation where both of us confess, and this will be strictly greater than the situation when I don't confess but the other player confess, right? And similar preferences will be for other player. Other player will try it, will be best utility will be for situation where that second player does not confess. When the second player confess and the first player does not confess, that will be ideal for the second player, right? So this will be similar. So now we need to define some payoffs for this. So first of all, see, we have strictly greater. Now it does not matter what payoffs are we choosing. What matters is we need to strictly make these numbers such that these conditions are satisfied. So we can say, since this has the highest utility, we can say the payoff or the utility for player 1 or suspect 1 will be 3. And then we need something which is slightly less than 3. Let's make it 2. Then we have confess, that is 1. And then we have not confess and confess. This order, which is the last and the least. So this is 0. Right? So now payoffs for player 2 or suspect 2. Right? So in this case, utility of player 2 when first player confess but I don't confess. So in that case, what will be utility? Utility for me, now this is player 2, so I'm representing this one. So if other person confess but I don't confess, obviously I'll get 6 years of imprisonment. So that will be utility will be represented by 0. Similar to this. If utility from not confess, both of us does not confess. So utility will be 2. Similar as here, both confess will be 1, and not confess and confess, that is the I confess but the other player does not confess. So obviously I'll be set free. So that will give me the highest utility of 3. See, these utilities or these payoffs are parallel to these payoffs, right? These are in similar lines. So now I have simply written down these payoffs. After getting these payoffs, we know how to construct a payoff matrix. This is our payoff matrix. This thing we have already discussed in our last video itself, but it will be good practice to see this. Now, a situation where suspect 1 does not confess and suspect 2 does not confess. Both of them will not confess. So in that case, utility for player 1 is 2. Okay, just write down. This is for suspect 1. And this is for suspect 2. You can see it from here also. It's similar. I've simply copied down these figures. So now if both of them does not confess, payoff for player 1, suspect 1 is 2. And the player and for this is also for player suspect 2 is also 2. Next is a situation where suspect 1 does not confess but suspect 2 confess. So suspect 1 does not confess and the suspect 2 confess is the situation this. Not confess, confess. So in this case, I am getting a utility of suspect 1 is getting for 0. And for suspect 2, which says that, okay, suspect 2 will confess, but suspect 1 will not confess. Again, this situation. So in this, it will get utility of 3. Obviously, this is for player 2 and this is already for player 1. We already know this. Next is player 1, suspect 1 confess, but the other player does not confess. So in that case, this is the situation. So it will get 3, and over here, player utility payoff for player 2 when first player confess and the other does not is 0. So this is this. And when both of them confesses, same. That is 1, 1. Right? So this is the basic payoff matrix for any prisoner's dilemma. Right? Now let's see how to find the Nash equilibrium for this entire scenario of prisoner's dilemma. I've simply copied down this matrix. You can see it's entirely same. Now let's find the prisoner's dilemma for this case. Now for this case, we know that we have four strategies that we need to decide from. First is not confess, not confess. Second, confess, not confess. These are the equilibrium strategies. These are strategies. These are not the equilibrium strategies. These are the strategies. We are simply writing these down. Then we have not confess and confess. And the last strategy will be both the players confess. So let's start with our very first strategy, that first player does not confess and the second player also does not confess. So this is this, right? So now let's see. We know, okay, let's suppose, how will we check this is, let's suppose suspect 1, let's suppose that first is that not confess is an equilibrium strategy, Nash equilibrium strategy. So in that case, we are saying, okay, that if this is true, then none of the players should have any incentive to deviate. Okay, so now let's check. If suspect 1 chooses its equilibrium strategy of not confess, then tell me, will suspect 2 choose this or this? Which payoff is better? Now we are saying that, okay, suspect 1 has already chosen to this, right? So now has already chosen to not confess. So now this is fixed. This 2 is fixed. This not confess is fixed. Now what should the player 2 choose? Whether to confess or not confess? We can easily see that the player 2 will choose to confess. Right? The player 2 will always choose to confess because the payoff is 3, which is greater than 2. Right? So player 2 has an incentive to deviate. So if suspect 1 chooses not confess, player 2 will always choose to confess. So in this case, we can say that player 2 has incentive to deviate from the strategy of not confess, not confess. So this is not a Nash equilibrium strategy. Right? Alternatively, we could have also seen it this way, that, okay, in case if suspect 2 chooses not confess, then it's quite obvious that what will player suspect 1 choose? Suspect 1 will either choose this 2 or 3. Which payoff is more? Any day payoff 3 is more. So again, suspect 1 will also have an incentive to deviate. So this can never be a Nash equilibrium strategy. Next case is when suspect 1 chooses to confess, but suspect 2 chooses to not confess. So now in this case, in this case, we know that, okay, if player 1 is choosing to confess and player 2 to not confess, then this is simply this scenario. Over here, we can see, okay, let's see. First of all, we say, okay, suspect 1 keeps its equilibrium strategy as confess. Now, will suspect 2 has an incentive to deviate? If suspect 1 chooses to confess, then suspect 2 has to decide either this 0 or this 1. Suspect 2 will always decide to confess to 1. Yes or no? Because it will never choose 0, it will choose 1. So this is again not an Nash equilibrium strategy because player 2 will always deviate. Similarly, if suspect 2 chooses not confess, then in that case, okay, if then suspect 1 does not have any incentive to deviate, but yes, suspect 2 has. So this is not a Nash equilibrium strategy. Next is not confess, confess. So this is our not confess, confess is this column. So now in this case, if let's suppose if suspect 2 chooses confess, it sticks to its policy. But obviously now suspect 1 has to decide whether to not confess or to confess. So in this case, suspect 2 has to choose between this or this. So obviously suspect 1 will try to deviate and choose 1. So suspect 1 will never choose not confess, it will always choose confess. So in this case, this is again not the Nash equilibrium strategy, because if suspect 2 chooses to confess, then suspect 1 always has an incentive to deviate to confess. Now our last strategy is confess, confess. So now for this confess, confess. Now for this we know that okay, if player 2 chooses to confess, player 2 has chosen confess. Okay, now player 1 has to decide, suspect 1 has to whether to go for this or to this. What do you think? Suspect 1 will obviously choose to go for confess. So okay, if player 2 sticks to this, then player 1 will stick to this. Now let's see will the case will be similar for suspect 1. If suspect 1 chooses to confess, right, then suspect 2 has two choices. Either to go for this or to go for this. So what do you think? Whether suspect 2 will choose to confess or not confess? Any day suspect 2 will choose to confess. So none of the player or suspect has any incentive to deviate from their equilibrium strategy. So in this case, we can say that, okay, if confess, confess is a Nash equilibrium strategy, then none of the players have that incentive, and thus this proves that yes, this is the Nash equilibrium strategy for this game. So what happens in the prisoner's dilemma? We can simply say that in prisoner's dilemma, basically both the players will confess. Both the players has an incentive to cooperate with each other and confess, because if a single player deviates from this, it will not gain anything out of it, right? So this is the situation of prisoner's dilemma. I hope you like this video. Do subscribe this channel for more videos. Thank you.